They're quite literally the seed of the whole vision. And what is the creative gonna do? They're gonna force multiply that. And if it's not there to be force multiplied, then it's just copying. To be in touch with that energy when you're coming up with how to speak to the customers of it is great because that's the actual like source material. It really does travel through and impact like the bottom line. Like it impacts the founder who isn't inspired by the vision anymore. That radiates through it. It comes through in the marketing. If one isn't in touch with the human market side, the other isn't in touch with even a real vision, then there's quite literally no generative forces there. If they don't believe in their own thing, of course they can't sell it. You almost need to understand how to prompt a human to pull that out in the right ways. Otherwise, it's just framework talking to framework. Hi, I'm Trina. I go by Trina Nuance online. I have a funny way I refer to what I do, which is fractional muse, which I view as the girl you talk to carve out, a space, a private space that turns into the creative energy that you use to build something that's going to be public.
And I was thinking about this. It's sort of like a fractional wife or fractional girlfriend, except you don't have sex with them. Because all of your clients are like these bros, right? And they're all in info, hardcore in the trenches, and you're like the feminine energy, right? Which makes perfect sense, actually. I think every guy needs somebody like that.
It's
Um,
a controversial aspect to it, you
yeah.
know?
Because like the girl, what is she gonna do? She doesn't get it. She exists to like live the soft life or whatever, you know? There's not that many women we can talk to about this stuff
Yeah.
who would actually get it and be useful. Because some might get it, but they're useless, you know? That's where I sort of factor you in the whole like scheme of things. Fractional wife or fractional GF or fractional FWB without the actual sex.
I think that element is obviously has a sexual implication because creative energy is life force. It
Hmm.
is, like it just is. So yeah, but it's also a transferable thing because I think like whether it was all the internet, the money Twitter guys that you're referring to, it's even been a thing that happens offline, like with founders in my hometown. And I didn't realize that pattern until I started crystallizing what I do. And I even did it on in a sales role that was selling to older divorced men or men dating.
It's why all these female coaches have so much success. I was joking about this with one of the other speakers. Like, as long as you have a pussy, you'll always be able to get clients. Because guys, they want to have like this woman around. Not just to have a woman around, but she listens to him, she affirms him. Guys don't get people listening to them or actually giving a shit about them in many cases. So it sounds kind of stupid, but I mean, it is what it is, you know?
Why does it sound stupid?
I mean, when you actually think about it, if you're coming at it from the perspective of a woman, it doesn't sound stupid at all. But from a guy, you're expected to have things figured out, and you are expected to never show any weakness, isn't it?
Yeah, and it's interesting because that's in a feedback loop with you. It's weird because you're not supposed to need space to talk about your feelings or process your thoughts. But if you do, you have that forbidden space. You can show up and do that better. You know?
Yeah. But usually, you would have your bros who would be in that kind of zone for you, where you would talk about stuff with them. And I'm sure there are pockets of men who have those kinds of relationships. But most guys, they don't have close friendships or they don't have a mastermind group. I mean, if we think about entrepreneurs in general, there's so few of us, and then so few of us in the same place, and then so few of us who are willing to bond with each other and have those kinds of conversations. So it's like a fraction of a fraction of a fraction. Sorry, I sidetracked you for a little bit, but let's get into your talking points.
Yeah, I was thinking about how to talk about the USC and creative strategist space, right? I've never been a creative strategist that somebody pays for paid ads. When I think about what I do and if it was to take place in that context, I thought about a few things, right? Correct me if I'm wrong, but if you're doing creative strategy for ads, you need it's standard to just like test a bunch of things and see what people respond to.
Yeah, you'll start off by looking at what's working currently, assuming you're not going into a brand new business. And then first iterate off of that to take care of the low-hanging fruit. And then eventually at some point you do net new concepts where you're going after brand new customers who they're like a completely different demographic or completely different niche or avatar.
I want to go one layer deeper, of course, because I think a differentiated like ad, I think it comes from the layer that can't really turn into a framework to be effective. You know, it's why am I good with meeting strangers, vibing with people, or having forbidden conversations with male founders? Because just like we know that a brand is about how you make people that follow your brand feel, same with like a D2C product, right? It's not like this. So, for example, we were talking about how to advertise one of the coaching programs I was selling. Um, we never ended up running this idea, but I had been on hundreds of conversations with grown men who were telling me about problems they don't tell anybody about. And I didn't get direct feedback from the market that about this idea. I got indirect feedback because I understood what they might do. You know, I feel like ad libraries, if you're just like operating on what's already worked, cool. And that obviously works. Otherwise, it wouldn't be standardized practice. But you can also skip that if you know what it's like in their world. And I think that's a really good place to like come up with creative strategy from. Like my idea was, you know, these guys getting on this offer probably sit there, and if they're feeling unsure about how to text or talk to people, they're going to get on like ChatGPT and have that like little private moment that they don't know, nobody knows about, and they keep it secret. And there's a little bit of shame in that. But the coaching offer was going to help them not need to rely on things like that. So my idea was to kind of speak to that moment, which I think is like an intimate ad style that works for D2C style creative strategy, right? Like I came up with that idea and speaking to that, and I think it becomes uncomfortable to implement for the same reason guys don't really talk to each other about this shit, which is like, uh-oh, I resonate with that. Maybe, you know? Um, and then later the Claude ad came out that went famous for the Super Bowl, and it felt like it indirectly validated my idea that we never ran. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does, because the best ads always come from something the customer said. It's called voice of customer. So we mine customer reviews, we mine competitors' customer reviews, we mine Reddit forums, we mine things that our customers see in the comments of the ads that we're running. That's where the creative inspiration comes from for a lot of the concepts that are eventually turned into ads. In the case of people saying what they're not willing to say in public or to people they're close to, you'll find that kind of expression on places where they're allowed to be anonymous, so like Reddit and things like that. And you'll find them talking to ChatGPT or some sort of AI, because the AI doesn't know them, and the AI won't judge them if they reveal their innermost fears and frustrations.
Right. What does good copy do, right? It can articulate something that somebody's been feeling or experiencing for them. It's immediate connection. That's just knowing something true about the people in the audience and resonating with it. So, is it true that creative strategists don't typically talk to a lot of customers?
Lazy creative strategists won't, but it's their job to do so. They're
Oh,
supposed to pick up the phone and call. It should be on every founder's weekly task list and every copywriter's weekly task list to pick up the phone and call 10 abandoned cards every single week and call 10 customers every single week. The creative strategists who take their job seriously will have systems in place to gather what their customers or their prospects are thinking.
if you're trying to come up with ideas of how to resonate or be memorable with people, I think that's a non-negotiable, right? You need to be very much in touch with their felt experience of what it's like to be with that identity that they're resonating with to market whatever that thing is. So I can't imagine that ideas flow easily. And that's probably why the first order solution that people rely on is just what worked in ads and testing different angles on that. But I think if you're just in touch with that and you know something true about them, I don't see AI can like give up those angles, but it can't be, would you agree that it can't be creative for you, really?
It's good at iterating on ideas. It's not good with coming up with actual like human creativity. It doesn't do that. You can give it a bunch of creative inputs and it can like chop it up for you nicely. It's good at that. But as far as real creativity, like the kind we associate with humans, it can't do that yet. The other problem that the creative strategist has is because of AI and because of how fast paced like online business is, the marketing department or the client that they're working for does not give them the time to slow down and actually do this real work of talking to the customers. They're expected to turn around, 10 concepts every single week or 20 concepts or 50 concepts or whatever the workload is. And they're also expected to use AI to do it. And so now it's the copywriting or creative strategy has become fast food or fast fashion or fast whatever. And the real benefit in research and talking to customers is slowing down and printing out the research and marking it up like with a highlighter and taking notes in the margins. That slowness is what leads to the biggest creative ideas and the biggest campaigns. In fact, old school copywriters, you give them a job, they look like they're doing nothing for 2 weeks. They're going boating, they're going to the cinema, they're napping, they're like scribbling on their notepad. And then
Yeah.
2 weeks later, they sit down and the entire ad, the entire campaign comes like gushing out of them. And so the requirement for speed and fast turnaround is is killing the ability of these creative strategists to produce actually good work.
Yeah, so that's just a fundamental misunderstanding of creative energy, like how creativity works, right? That's a big industry problem right now?
It is absolutely. There's like so many job ads. We're hiring a creative strategist, or we're hiring a direct response copywriter. And one of the first things they'll say is, you need to be working 996. Are you insane? You can only do 4 hours of real work,
I
actual
know.
deep work. It doesn't matter what field it is. Creative work, even more so. You have 3 to 4 hours of really good creative work in you, and then after that, you're done. The rest of the days has to be like admin stuff. So the idea that you're going to hire a copywriter to work 996 is absolutely insane. It shows that you have no understanding of what like creative work is supposed to be or how those people work. It also shows that you're incompetent. You have not worked with real copywriters before, real marketers before. And the other thing they'll do is they'll mention perks like access to the founder, as if that's a benefit of working for you. You're not Elon Musk or Steve Jobs. You're just some online business coach, right?
Why is that just to advertise the role? Is it because the
They
found
think too much of themselves.
Okay,
They might have a big personal brand. They might have a bunch of followers.
that's why.
They've got people up their ass, that kind of thing.
Well, I would say alternatively, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
Go ahead, please, please do.
No, I mean that could be useful for a different reason, right? Not because, oh my gosh, I'm gonna a selling point on this hiring post is because I want to be near the person with clout. Instead of that, it could be being more in touch with the founder energy and using that for the creative strategy, right? I remember watching these interviews with a founder in the D2C space and notice and when somebody comes up with like a product in the D2C space, what are they doing? They're using taste and judgment to be like, okay, I'm going to come up with this product and to be in touch with that energy when you're coming up with how to speak to the customers of it is great because that's the actual like source material. And I noticed that this founder specifically wasn't very inspired or activated or in touch with that energy. Because that arc had been like over for a while. So if that was part of a job listing and somebody can't recognize that as the actual, benefit that contributes to their role and they're just blinded by the clout of it, then that's unfortunate.
They also don't have a big enough vision. Most of these founders, they sell like widget, like a commodity widget, or they have no. I saw this really good line on Twitter. They're creatively poor themselves. So like
Yes.
they don't have good products, like they're just copying some trend to make a quick buck. And so like they don't have a vision for their business. And in order to get people to come into your business and come into your world and be on your team full time, you need to have a vision of something that's bigger than everybody on the team. You have to have this reality distortion field where the people that are going to work with you see themselves pursuing that vision with you, even
Yes.
though it's your vision and not necessarily theirs. And so these founders, they are creatively poor. They don't have a big vision. and they're unable, even if they do have a big enough vision, they are unable, because they're creatively poor, they're unable to communicate it in a way that is attractive enough to these creative workers to come on their team.
Yeah, because what is a creative gonna do? They're gonna like force multiply that, and if it's not there to be force multiplied, then it's just copying. And copying is fine. We all, go through I think we all go through a learning phase where we're just learning a bunch of things and then trying them and then before we actually develop our own experiences or ideas off those. And I think we're in a creativity famine. Until you get a founder inspired again in this new arc, which I talk about in my content because I think it's really important, then the little main core source of the product or service or whatever, even the team culture, whatever element of the business it is, marketing, sales, culture, like I don't understand why it's so discounted that matters, that they're activated. They're quite literally the seed of the whole vision. And if you're going at it instead from the ideal client or the customer side, that also I think is lacking, right? Because now we've been through this era where people, even if they, some people in the audience are going to know what pain points are and angles, blah, blah, and they can even respect it. Some of them are going to be resistant to it. Some of them will respect it. And some of them don't know what those concepts are at all. What they both have in common is they can feel that the experience is the same, right? They scroll through a bunch of ads and it's like, that even was an element in sales. The whole sales industry went through a shift too, because of course, elements of learning a process are important for making sure you have some level of structure and effectiveness. But if the meta experience of going through a sales call is the same as the last time they got ripped off or pushed, they're going to automatically be like, get me out of here. So I think the same thing's happening in marketing. So on their side, I think everything's going to shift towards more aspirational stuff, which requires helping them just feel that funny laugh moment like the Claude ad or the little humanized, but it's okay to be yourself and be that person ad idea with the guy using AI to figure out how to text people and starting with that source and then helping them, connect or aspire to something versus you have this problem and I can solve it. I really think that's next.
You're the fractional muse, right? When you work with the clients, how are you inspiring the founders and how are you inspiring these operators? What are you doing for them, like specifically, that is musy?
It's always very serendipitous how our paths cross. My woo-woo side comes in. I think that's a variable, you know? It's typically some sort of crossroads they're at or thing they can't talk about that's compounding into a bigger problem. When I was the community manager, all these founders ended up talking to me about things that didn't have to do with business. This is not within my formal role as much, but it became so because um whatever. And then for them, it was like, shit, I need to be working on the business, but this is really draining bandwidth. It's a serendipitous situation I show up in, and it's not really what they're trying to get done. It's like indirectly, but it helps it. The second is like, I think just talking to people, I call it a generative conversation because they light up. I think they feel free to just be raw, be what they are. And when you start from that place, it's very different than when you start from we need to get things done, or you need to show up this way, or you need to perform, or you need to hit this thing. So both it feeling like uncanny and then them feeling free and lit up, the possibilities just blow open. I'm working with a female client right now, and she was figuring out her like brand identity essentially, which wasn't the original intention. Or just feeling the way you need to again to identify your next peak as like a guidance counselor kind of vibe. Like that energy and that space for that energy isn't something everybody can just create. So I think that's what it is, right? It's just like an inspired, free, creative space. Otherwise, there's a bunch of material that's untapped because you're needing to perform or show up a certain way or get something done. It's activating. Like it quenches like a thirst that you might not have known you needed or that you or have shame over needing, depending on how conscious it is. And you're just like, damn, why am I so tired? Why am I so ineffective? Why can't I think? Why do I feel so bad about life? And you might attribute it to something else, but really you just need to feel inspired again. And it's not even me. I'm just the medium. Sounds so woo, but I'm the medium for that, right? Because we're talking about that person's thing, whether it's a client or a prospect or whatever. But I think it's just about the space, as intangible as that sounds.
You said that it's serendipitous and it quenches a thirst that they didn't know they needed, or if they did know, they're not able to communicate it to someone. What is it that's missing? What are they missing when you show up that you're able to fill?
Clarity, inspiration, and their like raw self, right? Maybe the only raw version of them that gets to show up is it alone. And maybe when they're alone because of whatever crossroads they're at or whatever problems they're facing, it's not really as productive. It's not a productive space to just be alone. So then they might go talk to AI, but that's not a human. So they're not really vibing either. They're stuck in intellect, not energy, right? They're super in the head, not nothing like in the body and the vibes. And I always reference vibes, and I know it makes it sound silly, but it really matters. So they're not getting the raw self in a way that helps them or like brings their energy up. And that is then impacting the clarity of ideating or getting clear direction. Especially if we take the idea of like a male founder, he's responsible for something in every single other role. You know, you're responsible for leading a team. You're responsible for leading your wife and kids. You're responsible for being the man with your buddies. You're responsible for, demonstrating authority and value to your audience. In this space, you're not really responsible to anything besides for your own thing.
Yeah, you're just responsible for looking after yourself,
Yes.
which they don't get to do.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's really interesting. And so, like, when you work with these founders, I'm assuming most of them have been male. I know you said you're working with a female client. Even when we say fractional muse, it sounds so intangible. What are some of the outcomes? What happens when they start working with you or when you've been hanging out and vibing with them? What changes do you see in them?
They feel really good about being them. And it's not, I assume it's obvious in my personality that I'm not just, oh my God, you're the best, unconditional. I'm a little bit rough. So it's not because I'm just kissing their ass. It's because I genuinely, like, I'm obsessed with humanity, right? I'm so interested in just people. So they feel good about being themselves. And it's not reliant on every other source of feeling good about themselves, the responsibilities, the numbers, the performance. Why it happens with men more than women. The women that I am able to serve that role with, it's either an aspirational relationship with me making very clear their individuality too, and what their version of things they aspire to, or they have like what you could call a more like integrated vibe too. Somebody on one Twitter once called it like sexually ambidextrous wisdom. And not all women think like that. Whereas I think if a man is speaking to me, there's no like we don't get hung up on we're both women. That surprisingly can get in the way.
Mhm. You're not competing with each other.
Yeah.
So that's another problem as well. So, like, guy talking to a guy, there's still an element of competition. We're trying to figure out
Right.
where each of us is in the pecking order, right? With another woman, especially someone that you're not sexually involved with, there's no competition and there's nothing to prove. I'm not trying to prove anything to you. And so the type of conversation that we're able to have is going to be very, very different versus talking to some other guy who is also an entrepreneur or talking to some woman that I'm trying to smash. I think the conversation is totally different and like the energy is going to be totally different.
It's an important distinction because it's not like I aim to speak to the majority of men in my work. It just happened that way. And that element isn't something women are conscious of or would like to own if they became conscious of. And I'm not even saying anything good about an opinion about it. It's just a variable that interrupts the flow of what happens in those conversations. It's so funny, right? Because I had to have that effect in one-on-one conversations like a million times before I realized the pattern and saw in every domain I would work in. When that starts to not be something somebody has in their life, not Trina, the variable of vision, feeling inspired and vibing, being yourself, then it really does travel through and impact like the bottom line. Like it impacts the founder who isn't inspired by the vision anymore. That radiates through it. It comes through in the marketing, the creative strategists who are hired and then they don't have the creative. Like everybody's having to realize on the commerce side now how important that creative element is. So now it's like, oh my gosh, I feel like this is a really important duty. You know, it used to be just like I'm this creative whack job, like just bopping around and whatever inspires me, I'm going to turn it into something and then also serve somebody else's thing. Now it's like, oh shit, this is really important.
Mention a couple of them, but what are some of your own unique qualities that make you kind of end up falling into this kind of role in so many situations? I'm sure there's something that's uniquely you that this keeps happening to you.
Yeah, I'm very unreasonably obsessed with novelty and exploration. My stepdad, one time, I told him the 3 pillars of health, wealth, and relationships, and he pointed out the 4th element that we talk about a lot, which is, I don't remember how he described it, but he was like, "There's a 4th," and I was like, "What?" And he was like, he was describing things like travel, reading for fun, having a hobby, and I was like, "Oh, yeah," and that is kind of how I see what I've always been obsessed with, that I guess is a unique contribution to the spaces that I've shown up in, because it points to that creativity, right? So because of that, that's led me to all these different jobs I've tried, all these different humans offline in my non-professional life that I've spoken to, which is market data that people test to find out. But instead, I can reference, there's very few situations I get in that I can't think of an example that you know, I think that's unique. I have a pretty high risk tolerance. I have a hunger for exploring things that I haven't yet. Like, I love to go to a place I haven't been, figure out what it's like to be a local there. I don't just visit somewhere. I like to just live my normal life there, which is just 90% of the time is go to the gym, go on a walk, and like write and do whatever work I'm trying to do. And when I travel, that's what I do. I just set up camp somewhere and do the same thing I do at home. And in that, I bop around and talk to strangers. So that's surprisingly underrated. And now, of course, we can all see in the direction of culture. Now that AI and frameworks are, we're all feeling a little bit uninspired by that. Like, analog is coming back, offline experiences are coming back. So I just feel lucky for having been super interested in the things that are happening next. And I think that just is the same as the answer to your question, right? Just it goes full circle back to people didn't realize that they needed quenching that thirst, because it feels like it distracts from the work. Real life and enrichment and inspiration and just like adopting a culture or understanding a human that you don't relate to, all of that can be viewed in a lot of typical cases as at odds with your health goal, at odds with your fitness routine, at odds with your need to work, at odds with your need to prioritize your relationships and your family and your spouse. But now I think it's becoming very clear that that element actually can help contribute indirectly and in like almost like this controversial way because of the energy that it gives you and the interestingness. That founder of a D2C brand, the originating need of that was their taste and judgment and discernment, thinking of the product that you're now going to market. So when that founder isn't inspired, then of course that translates into the work. Another element of it was, instead of testing a bunch and referencing a bunch of other ads, you can just get in touch with the human element of it, which you confirmed they should be speaking to their customer base. And I think that's should be a non-negotiable. It isn't standard. And then the example of the dating coach offer and the AI thing, there was no examples of that in ads. And that wasn't something that you would get speaking to the market. That was something that I just knew from knowing that kind of gentleman. And I brought it up on a bunch of sales calls and closed them because it was like, oh my gosh, yeah. And it's like, and you don't have to it doesn't have to be this way. It's like almost like understanding the things that they would never say, that you can't look to a swipe file to see an example of. And if you can get that across, it's such a memorable thing. And I think people are trying to figure out how to make their ads memorable. And it just goes back to that felt experience, whether it's the founder with the original idea or it's the customer who's watching your ads or reading your copy. So it just all goes back to the same core thing.
You mentioned the founder's judgment and discernment. Sometimes you don't even have to talk to the customer. The founder, if he's the right kind of founder, he knows what's best or she knows what's best for the customer. So they had this thing on like Twitter called founder mode, right? Where it's the founder of the startup is driving everything in the company because he has a big vision. He can have that big vision for the market itself. And so in that situation, the founder can use his own creativity, his own inspiration, his own ambition, his own vision, his own judgment and discernment to drive not just his employees, but also the taste of the consumer.
Do you think it's a problem that in a lot of situations now where they need ads to bring in money, they're not in that energy?
I think the problem has to do with the fact that if the founder is in it for the wrong reasons, he just doesn't have that inspiration or that vision, right? So if he's a branded dropshipping kind of founder, he doesn't actually care about the product. He doesn't actually care about the people that he's selling to. So he's never going to have that vibe about him, even if you put him in front of a camera and make him record some ads. But for the bigger brands, the brands that have a thesis of why they exist, like they have a lore, right? And the founders have a lore for why this brand exists. That makes it much easier. And so that's why the founder ad, where it's the founder talking about the problem that they're solving, the founder talking about their history behind, why they started this brand, those ads perform really, really well. But if it's just some random drop shipper who's spinning up a bunch of Shopify stores to see which product hits so they can scale that, yeah, absolutely. There's not going to be any vision or inspiration behind that at all.
That's probably a huge problem. Both the founder and the service provider on the marketing side, if one isn't in touch with the human market side, the other isn't in touch with even a real vision, then there's quite literally no generative forces there. Well,
Yeah. Can you imagine as a creative strategist or a creative person trying to work for one of those businesses where even the founder doesn't believe in what they're selling? The maximum amount of aggressiveness and salesmanship you can employ is when you truly believe that the thing that you're selling can help the person that you're selling it to. That works on sales calls, that works on copy, that works on marketing. Now, if the founder himself doesn't believe in what he's selling, how the hell are you gonna believe in what you're selling?
that was my only prerequisite when I was first hunting for a sales role. It wasn't even like how well they're doing. Like I got thrown on 3 or 4 offers in a row that weren't doing well. So I wasn't like, well, how much is this offer making? Don't get them out. Okay, well, it was I believed in the product and now I can do it. So same thing. And if they don't believe in their own thing, of course they can't sell it. And ad libraries are like more of a closed loop than that. And then if you have that, you need to be able to, you almost need to understand how to prompt a human to pull that out in the right ways. Otherwise, it's just framework, talking a framework.
And there's one other aspect of it where the copywriter or the creative strategist, the founder has that vision or that energy, but they just haven't been able to communicate it. And so the creative strategist or the copywriter acts like a psychotherapist or a master journalist where they pull that vision out of the founder. The M&M story, right? They used to sell it to the army. They would call energy pellets, right? And the soldiers would walk around with these energy pellets and they would eat the M&Ms for quick energy. It's chocolate, right? Now, like the war was over, they had all this chocolate to sell and they're trying to sell it to the mass market. So now they hired this ad agency for a copywriter, and the copywriter is interviewing the founder and is trying to get what the actual benefit is of the product. And the copywriter is having a hard time. The founder is unable to express what the benefit of the product is. And so they get into a shouting match, and then the copywriter says, just tell me in one sentence what is the benefit of the product. And the founder says, they melt in your mouth, not in your hand. And so that is the entire premise
That's
behind
good.
M&M's that has built the entire company. It's the same slogan that they use today. And there are so many examples of that where it's sort of like a synergistic or a symbiotic effect where you have a founder who has a great product. Sometimes they may be charismatic and communicative enough to express what that vision is. But if they aren't able to, the copywriter or the creative person can pull it out of them if they are skilled enough.
Yes, that is perfectly aligned with.
That's
So
what you do.
yeah, that's exactly what I do, right? Because on one end, it's like a barbell ICP too, and it's not like, oh, this gender, this age, whatever. It's a situation they're in. And on one end of it is the client I referenced. She's at the very beginning of her journey trying to translate. So I have all this material from her real life, and there's been unconscious competencies she is now selling. But then on the other end of that, there's the founder who's already spent years in the game. He's already mastered it. And he needs to enter a new arc because now his old identity that he marketed himself with his old glories, he's not inspired by that vision anymore. So it's just time for a refreshed one. I was talking to a bunch of founders that I used just conversation with them to represent to them the actual juice that they have. But even they have a difficult time letting go of the old arc version, because you get used to living in that way. And even if it's like, wow, I have all this material that is amazing, and now I feel inspired by my own self and my own substance. That That means I'm gonna have to do things like become visible or whatever. And I don't know that I'm ready for that. So that's interesting because that's a layer I'm hitting with that now. But that's the two ends of it, right? It's they're at the very beginning of a new arc, whether that means the beginning of the journey or way later in the journey.
I think so. Spell out your Instagram for the people who want to see more of what you do.
Trina Nuance. Everything is under Trina Nuance, all my socials, except for my new YouTube channel, which is also linked in my Instagram.